Hello, I'm Joshua and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost I'd like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video is going to be on living dangerously, and the reason why I'm choosing to talk about this is because, well, apparently, and the way I was expressing myself in the previous video I made on INFJs and being creative, my thoughts were far too uh, ambiguous and vague for people to really key in on what exactly I was trying to explicate. And I was trying to be much more narrow in that presentation than I normally am. And so maybe that's part of the reason why that occurred. So I'm going to take blame for what was wrong with that video. But I do want to say, first and foremost, this that what I mean by living dangerously is something I get from, that is a concept or a term I get from Friedrich Nietzsche, but it's also something that I think is true of creative individuals in general, or people who people consider heroic in the first place. So I would say this, like, living dangerously is not exactly something that it's part of the reason why. So I'll say why I was vague about these things in that video is because I can't really tell you what it is for you, and just because I can't tell you what it is doesn't mean it's not a real thing. So I would say that it's a contingent truth. It's more of an existential truth. That's something that's based off of your action and acting in the world. And I'll give an example. So this is going to be kind of be cheeky, but it's just to show, it's to demonstrate to a certain critic that maybe they don't know exactly what they're talking about certain things. So people like Tesla, for example, and people love to talk about Tesla's creative genius. One thing that's true about Tesla and his experimentations is that I can't remember the exact experiment, but Tesla knew that it could potentially kill him by doing it. Tesla knew that it would kill other people if they came close to it, if they came close to him conducting this experiment. There's also a number of experiments that he had in God, I can't remember. I can't remember exactly where he knew very well that he could compromise the entire power of a city, and he went along with that experiment. Now, is that living? So to me, that's living dangerously. And why is that living dangerously? Because he knows that there are lines that, as they pertain to his own well-being and as they pertain to, I guess, like the normative customs of his whatever landscape, he should observe. They're meaningful to him from the standpoint that he's aware of them. I don't mean living dangerously as a sin. I don't think living dangerously is something you can do from the standpoint of just blissfully going out and gallivanting in the world and being hedonistic or something like that. I think it's something you consciously understand or know, but not maybe from a not from the conscious standpoint that you would articulate, oh, well, I know that my doing this experiment is more meaningful to me, and I think ultimately more meaningful to whatever ultimate value I'm pursuing that I think I inherit from culture. So I'm going to do it anyway, though there are these stupid rules here that say that I shouldn't, or there are these expectations that are trying to govern and manipulate me in a particular direction. And so I don't think people can articulate that necessarily, because I just made that up, whenever it's going on. But I think that people have many different instances of them running into the lines and the boundaries that make themselves manifestly clear in their life that they should not transgress. Sometimes these things are in social, cultural relations, so maybe it has to do with your family members, maybe it has to do something like with your boss or like the job you have or something like that. The only reason why I picked the things that I picked for INFJs in particular is because I think, well, I've met many INFJs, and I will say that INFJs generally are creative, but I will also say that I have not met many INFJs like Dostoevsky or Jung, and that video was specifically about creativity in the sense that creativity that would potentially bring creative genius back into the world. Because if you're asking me, I don't think that there is enough genius in the world right now. But I would say that that was the motivation of that one. And more so, I guess, that I would say that whenever you're thinking about this as it pertains to yourself, I would say that I can't tell you, where these lines are because I don't know your life. So the boundaries or whatever lines, so there are things you have to transgress. Like, I use the word transgression is because it's a sin. Um, it's a sin. That's the best way I could put it. It's a sin, not from a literal objective standpoint that it's a sin, but cultural. So I tend to think this: the reason why that language is in religious dialogue is because it's something that's true about the psychological um, appearance of reality per se, but social cultural reality rather than like objective reality. So that's why I phrase it like that. But I mean from the standpoint that so I guess I should make a scenario. So teenagers intentionally do this. So I'm not saying go out and like be a teenager or something like that. Teenagers, whenever they're children too, at times, whenever they're pushing boundaries and things like that, they pick social lines. They don't really know, so they may know what people think or how people generally feel, because kids aren't stupid. But they're picking these sort of lines and boundaries to transgress specifically to see how far they can get. And so I guess like this, you are disciplined throughout your life not to do that. And I'm not saying, excuse me, I'm not saying that you're not disciplined in every way, every other person is. You're an individual. You're the person who inherited your family. You're the person who came in the time period you came in. You're the person with your personality. You're the person with your sex. You're the person with your sexual orientation. You're the person with your IQ. You're the person with your creativity. You're the person with all the attributes that you have. So, because there's this kind of trait distribution going on around you, and there's a historical contextual relevancy to that distribution, and you are going to experience, I guess, like a sort of social punitive measure towards those things to hem you better in line with the world around you. It's probably going to be the case that if you're someone who pays attention to patterns in the world, you're going to notice some pattern, some meaningful pattern that tends to localize itself against it tends to localize itself in, I suppose, the areas that are. So I'd put it to you like this: sacredity and creativity don't exist anymore. Or I'd put it like this: creative people create new sacred things, so they create the new sacredity, but old sacredities may not stick around. And I don't mean sacredities as in to say that creatives are heretics. And I have to use this language because there's a really great book called God, like there's a really great book. You should remember the title. Science is a Sacred Cow. There we go. Science is a Sacred Cow. And I forget the author who writes this. I forget the author who wrote this text, but Science is a Sacred Cow is a pretty good text. I'm not saying I agree with it completely from philosophical, and I'm not saying I completely agree with it from a philosophical perspective, but I do understand, like, I do get its arguments, and it does make good arguments about some of the asinine aspects of the institution of organized science. And so I would say it's a great text. Now, what I mean about creative people destroy old sacredity and make new sacredity is the phenomenon of science being a sacred cow. So the idea of a sacred cow is we have this bull and it's golden and everything like that, and people are bowing before it and everything like that, but nobody really knows why. The only reason why we do it is because of a number of emotions that make it, I guess, convenient to do so. But those things lie in direct opposition to some kind of larger or broader goal. And you've seen this narrative in movies, man. Like, it shouldn't be the case that, it's not hard to, I don't think it should be hard to, I guess, like, understand about it, it's the case that not everything that is meaningful to you is convenient. That's just not the case. And the more you pursue things that are meaningful to you, the less inconvenient it becomes. No, excuse me, I should have said the more inconvenient it becomes. The less convenient it becomes, the more inconvenient it will become. For multiple reasons. I mean, none that I can specifically designate to you. I'd say that from, I guess, understanding it from the vantage point of biographies of eminent individuals and things like that. Well, I mean, there's constant emotions that are part of any social landscape, such as jealousy and resentment. I mean, if you go doing something and gallivanting off into the wayward beyond of, your predilections and things like that, don't be so sure that people are going to be okay with that from the standpoint that, you know, sometimes the things that you think and you do directly threaten the, I guess, ideas and emotional well-beings of other people. Other times people just don't like to feel like they're inferior in a certain way to some of the, I guess, like, ways and things about yourself. But that's the reality, from an emotional standpoint, and that's always going to live in the world. Also, it's the case, too, that even if people aren't jealous and resentful of you, people are not exactly the most thorough in their analyses of things. So we have rationale, but we're not rational. And most of, I suppose, our ideation is governed by the landscape of our emotions. Most people, from, I guess, just a purely biological standpoint, are governed by their left hemisphere, such that it's very narrow in its appraisal of the world. And you don't really want it to not be that way because, well, if it weren't that way, you'd probably feel bad because it's that way to mediate a certain network of positive emotions and various things like that, such that people don't really want to pay attention. It's why I say that it's hard for you to be honest with yourself. So, because I wouldn't say that your brain is conspiring against you necessarily. It's just that whenever you think of, I suppose, whatever it means to be rational and whatever you think it means to think from, I guess, a modern perspective and be creative from a broader perspective, it's the case that the brain is not exactly in its naturalness. It's not exactly always conducive to those aims and those goals because it's goal directed and status oriented. And because achieving a goal and maintaining status quo, and status quo is something of, I guess, like a term that people should understand from the, I guess, individual landscape. People, they may not all want to be at the top, but they definitely don't want to be at the bottom. They don't want to move down, usually. So I put it like this: there's something in your brain that tracks how you're showing up in a social landscape. It's very, very. I mean, people are sensitive to this. It's why there's social anxiety and all sorts of things. I mean, like, that's a reality. And whether people, I suppose, are aware of it or not, that thing is always operating and it's always working. It's never not doing so because, well, you'd be dead if it weren't. And if it were doing, I guess, a poor job, you would have depression or something else like that. And I don't mean to say people who have depression, so that, I guess, I just should say it like this: if it's not constantly trying to keep your perspective at a certain level of status normativity, then you'd probably have clinical depression. So I put it like that. And so if you don't have clinical depression, chances are you're probably not exactly always interested in paying attention to the world in terms of all the ways it could be incongruent for you. And I'm not saying that, you just pay attention to the incongruencies of the world and that's going to make you a creative genius or something like that. I don't think that that's true, but I do think that it will lead you more to truth that suits you. So I put it like that because this is from an existential standpoint, I suppose. I'd phrase it like that. That you inherit a bunch of things from the world. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily useful to you. Even if you're in love with those ideas, even if you like them, because they weren't actually made for you. So reality, and definitely as you go through things in your life, you're going to be more differentiated. That's why Jung called the process of individuation, the process of differentiation, and why he associated it with experiencing things in the world by going out and doing things and constantly coming into contact with yourself through experience. Synchronicity and various aspects and phenomena like that, but it's like so you can think about it like this. So a lot of times let's take Muhammad for example. Muhammad had a revelation in a cave, but Muhammad had a revelation in a cave. Moses encountered the burning bush in the wilderness. The Israelites saw a giant blazing pillar of fire in the desert. I mean, to put it like this, so I'm not saying it's true from an objective standpoint, but from a pragmatic standpoint, whatever makes the most meaning manifest itself in your life is not exactly something that you're going to be able to intelligibly reason upon, and it's not something that's going to necessarily be completely intuitive to you in the first place. So this is kind of the issue with intuition being a lead for people. Intuition oftentimes is based on expectations. So it's based on your normative experience in the world. And whether or not people realize it or not, what you see on a day-to-day basis, what you read, what you encounter, what you, I guess, know, basically, is what's constructing the intuitions and the impressions you have about the world. And partly, too, your emotional landscape. You don't have intuitions and thoughts apart from your emotional landscape. You have intuitions and thoughts because of your emotional landscape. And that's just objective. That's just biologically the way that it is. And I say because it's like that, there's good reason to believe that you probably would not be able to figure out what's right if you wanted to. Like, just by thinking about it, or just by, I guess, like, just by thinking about it, or just by, it's not contained in yourself. So it's why we have the idea of objectivity. I don't know if I believe in objectivity, but I definitely believe in this, that you're a multitude of things from the standpoint of your, I guess, individual makeup. You're a biological being, so that gives you a sex, a sexual orientation, and a personality. So those things are true about you. You're also a cultural being. And since that's true, you're also a social being. And so because sociality is a result of your biology, but because you're social, it makes you cultural. And so you're a historical creature as well. You're made up in a perfunctory way such that you're not exactly completely useful to yourself. You're not completely useful to other people. So most of your education in terms of your early childhood is trying to make you more useful to everybody else around you. You know, some things just do stick around because, you know, you're an animal, and there's certain things you can't change because they're more ingrained, let's just put it like that, than not, for whatever reason. But don't allow that to let you think that all things you think and you believe are to use religious language, a manifestation of your God. So I'm not going to say that gods exist or anything like that, but I just find that the, I guess, religious narrative is very useful for what I'm trying to describe right now. Because the reason why religion is useful as a narrative is because I can't tell you specifically, like, what it is, per se. Like, I don't know. So I don't know. but I know certain things about human, I guess, beings, like in terms of our psychology. And it's the case that, well, yeah, imminent, I guess, like, I've read a lot of things such that I have an intuition. I've read a lot of things and I've experienced a lot of things and I've talked to a lot of people and I've hung out with a lot of people and things like that. I've lived in many different parts of the US and I've lived in different parts of the world. I just think that I have a hypothesis about something. I'll just put it like that. Like I have a very strong hypothesis about something such that I think that it makes sense to use this language. So so people worship idols, man. Like that's a reality. And what's the problem with an idol? An idol can't do anything for you. So it's not a useful truth from the standpoint of your own emotional psychological makeup. And I'm not saying that, people don't find things in life. So I think this is exactly what I think. So God has a line in the Old Testament that I found you in mud and covered in blood, and I washed all this stuff away from you. I made you a beautiful woman. I gave you diamonds and jewels and pearls and everything, and so on and so forth. And I made a nation out of you, and I made you my people unto myself, and so on and so forth. So on and so forth. That deal. Okay? So people who are Christian will know what I'm talking about. People who are, and they also think blasphemy, but I'll express it like this, that I think that people are very pragmatic, so they're not exactly... Mankind is a very practical animal. It's a very, very practical animal from multiple standpoints, because your brain in the first place is a goal-oriented status pattern-seeking thing. That's the only reason why it cares about the patterns in the first place, because it has a lot of emotions that it's trying to serve. It has a particular result it wants. So I just put it like that. You have expectations even when you're a baby, even when you're a child, and your expectations center around your social standings. And that's the reality for most people. And because I guess we're tool-based things, there's a pragmatic bent to it, goals. So we know that there's particular actions and aspects of reality that lend themselves to us or not. And so that's what makes us feel certain ways in the first place. And so I think because it's like that, you have more reason to not pay attention to things that are probably true about you and the world, because they're just not convenient. And they're not exactly the most observable things. So that's why God shows up in a burning bush. It's why he's in the whisper of the wind or something like that. That's why, for a long time before it became normative to be Christianity, religious people seemed crazy. It's like why there's a charismatic aspect and a charisma, I guess, associated with all forms of what maybe Kierkegaard would consider true religion, because there is an existential truth to reality that is more relevant, I suppose, to individual experience, or understanding the world from the perspective of individual phenomenology rather than, I guess, pure emotionality, because your emotions are complicated and they're not exactly... So you're not very smart. So I just put it like that. You're not very smart, and you're not interested in being honest with yourself. Like, that's just not the truth. And so it's the case that you have to look for, and you may say, well, damn it, if that's the case, then how the hell is it the case that I can know any kind of existential truth or anything like that? It's through action, and it's through what's revealed through you to you in action in terms of what compels you. It doesn't have to be the case that, you're... compulsion is, I guess, true about the objective reality. But whatever your compulsion is, it's more true to what actually operates in you from a motivational standpoint. So part of the reason why it's the case that this is a viable strategy is because you still are a social creature. So you're not going to just, some people will invent a completely new way of being for themselves, and how well they do this and how well they can articulate this is going to be big. That's really what's going to be the difference between somebody who's insane and somebody who we consider highly creative. I mean, it doesn't have to be in every aspect of their lives, but that's what's true about highly creative people. And so I put it to you like this, that the reason why it's a viable strategy is because you're probably not going to do something completely original in all ways in areas of your life, but you are going to, I guess, move towards things that are intrinsically you. If intrinsically you is not creative genius, then that's okay. I'm not saying that you have to be a creative genius or something like that. I just prefer creative genius. That's all I'm saying in those videos. That's all that I'm saying. But moving to something that's intrinsically you is good for yourself. From an emotional standpoint, you'll actually be motivated to do things. You'll actually not want to be completely any one way. So Jung, for example, a lot of people don't know this about Jung. Jung didn't necessarily like personality theory. Why didn't Jung like his own version of personality theory? Because he felt like it was shallow. Because he thought it was obviously true that no person would really be a complete description of some kind of didactic mode of being. No real person. But in his clinical practice, he saw consistently that these types of patterns or archetypes would emerge in people and be associated with their psychological problems or issues. It's why people go so far as to saying personality is neuroses. Now, I don't believe that personality is neuroses because animals have personalities and they seem just fine, psychologically healthy and normal and everything like that. From a standpoint of they don't want to kill themselves typically and everything like that. Now, it's the case that human beings are different because animals, unless... So, for example, chimpanzees have culture, but chimpanzees don't have culture, not in the strict way human beings have it. So they don't have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years of abstraction which they inflict on themselves and conform their actions to. That's something that's a very, I guess, powerful tool for human beings, the fact that we are so damn psychologically plastic and adaptive. But at the same time, it's problematic for if you desire to, I suppose, live what religious people would call a religious life or a meaningful life, it would be that. So I would say it's an existentialism, but there's a reason why Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky turned to existentialism in order to save Christianity, because the truth about, I guess, human life is that it's a phenomenological experience. So, and I guess more to Jung and the whole neuroses thing, so trying to be a bit more narrow than I normally am. Because to be human is something, because Jung, before he had his practice, went and sat with gauchos, and he went to Peru, he went to Africa, he did a lot of different things, living with Aborigines and indigenous people. He did a few archaeological studies, actually went to archaeological sites and did digs with people. He met Freud. He traveled to study with Freud. He did a lot of stuff. I'll just put it like that. He did a lot of stuff, and because he did all of those things, he understood something about human nature, that there's an animal underneath it all. And that animal is the reason why maybe religion and gods are around. He also read Ludwig Feuerbach, and so he had Jung was well read and he was well experienced. And so he had an understanding of, at least he had a hypothesis about what it meant to be human. And so he didn't believe that he believed all people could develop these archetypal expressions of themselves, or all people would be could express some dimension of these things. But it's why Jung had the idea of individuation, because just for example, TI-FE axis, just like there's somebody who's an introverted thinker, they also have extroverted feeling. I mean, to me, this is like a cheap way of expressing it, because what Jung was trying to, I suppose, get to before Isabel Briggs, and it's not the case that he didn't talk about the axis theory or anything like that, but it was one big hypothesis for him. The true thing that lived underneath all of it was the individual, or an authentic individual. Something that, nobody knows how, I guess, like, feeling based you have to be, or how thinking based you have to be. Only you know that. And it's not something that can be prescribed to you from the standpoint of your persona. And it's not something that can be prescribed to you from the standpoint of your culture. Because your persona, whether or not it's something you like or not, it's something you inherit from culture. It's a mask that you show other people. But that's not the reality of what motivates you. Because Jung looked at the world and saw it in a very different stage than maybe most people look at it. So Jung thought we were living in a post-religious era. That's the way that I'd put it. Nietzsche thought we were living in a post-Christian era, but Jung thought for the religious person in general that for the most part, most people are living in a post-religious world. And this has consequences to their psychological well-being, which is why he came up with all the stuff that he came up with, because that was the problem he was trying to solve. And Jung wanted to, so Nietzsche said that God was dead. Jung wanted to rediscover God. Jung wanted to, as Jordan B. Peterson would put it, I guess. I don't know if I agree with Jordan B. Peterson completely, but his archetypal description of this, I think, is something that people... Well, if you've seen Pinocchio, rescuing your father from the belly of a whale, I think that makes sense from a Western standpoint, because most people have seen Disney movies. It's just the case that I don't think, though, that the final conclusion that that's always going to be the idea of God is the right one. So I would say that for Jung, in his historical context, that finding God in self, per se, may have been the way to go. But I don't know if that's the way we should go right now, because I think, like Nietzsche thought, that you always have to reevaluate your values. Just because reality changes, and because there are historical, I guess, like, contingencies and factors, we may not always be the same animal. And so this is something that Nietzsche, God damn it. I mean, like, okay, so anyways, like, point being, you're not smart enough. You're not smart enough. So from the reason why you're not smart enough is because you are not all contained in yourself. That's the truth about it. And you and yourself is not exactly completely interested in yourself from this standpoint. Your ego, or your persona, yourself may not like it as much as you like it. It's like, if you want to personify these things. That's why I turn to religious language, man, because it's hard to phrase it in a very non-mythological standpoint, like, or a non-woo-woo standpoint, or what people may ascribe as a woo-woo standpoint. I'd suppose I'd phrase it like this. You're very complicated, and you have more than one brain that thinks. You have a brain that thinks that you're aware of, and you have a brain that thinks that you're not aware of, but it dictates a lot of what's going on in your life. And I think from the standpoint of how creative you're going to be, how meaningful your life is going to be dependent on how much you're willing to attune yourself to the other thinking part of yourself, rather than the one that you can most easily make out, or the one that you constantly interface and experience with. Your creativity lies lock and step with that one, not with your rational or your persona. Your persona may perceive your creativity and things like that, but it's not the thing that's creative. And it doesn't just like, I guess I'd put it like this. So Jung may have known the depths of himself, but I don't think most people do, even if they think that they do, because I guess like this. Whenever you go into the depths of yourself, you can invent new religious symbolization. And maybe you don't. Well, I put it like this. Like, the whole institution of Jungian topology was to bring the collective unconscious back to the consciousness of mankind. And if that's true, it's the invention of new religion. And that's where I think people don't like Jung, but it's not religion from a classical standpoint. It's personal religion. Now, if other people find whatever symbols and whatever things you come up with meaningful, then that may be something to say, but, you need to tell them to move the hell away, because your truth is not their truth. It's like you're something of a particular vein of context, biological, historical, emotional, all of those things. Maybe you can point and be a guide like Jung and Nietzsche were for, I guess, what they would describe as free spirits, but you're an individual, not a, I guess, like, you're not an archetype. So that's the reality. So living dangerously, I guess, if you want to understand it from another perspective, is coming more in contact with the archetypes of the world, I guess, or your life, because there are various archetypes that exist in your culture that people don't know are there. That's one thing. They may be, you may not know that they're operating and governing yourself and your perceptions of the world. You don't know necessarily if they're the ones that you ought to be serving, or that, well, I'd put it like that. Yeah, I don't know I don't know. You don't know. There's a lot. You're ignorant. You don't know a lot. And so the only way you find out those things is by accepting the call to adventure, which is living dangerously. So that's how I put it. And if you can understand it, great. If you can't, yeah, there's differences in people. So I just put it like that. Okay. That's my video. Thank you for watching.